Ali, and welcome to my applied assignment presentation. In this project, I examined how course concepts in special education, specifically disability, family systems, and inclusive practices connect to real-world experiences and professional responsibilities. This assignment allowed me to apply what I've learned throughout the course to deepen my understanding of how to support diverse learners and collaborate effectively with families and school teams. In the following slides, I will walk through the focus of my applied task, key insights gained, and how this experience has strengthened my approach to equitable and inclusive education. On this slide, I'm sharing an overview of what I will be presenting. First, I'll start with my pre-work, where I explain the topic I chose, why I selected it, and the perspective I focused on. Next, I'll go over my research, which includes my interview with an elementary special education teacher and the evidence I gathered about the experiences supporting a student with autism. After that, I'll share my new learning, what I gained from this project regarding access, inclusion, equity, and real-world inclusive practices in schools. Finally, I'll wrap up with my content inquiry, where I highlight the new questions that emerged through this process and areas I want to continue learning more about. This structure will guide the rest of my presentation. For my pre-work, I chose to focus on special educators' experiences working with students with autism. I'm sharing my topic, why I chose it, and the aspects of inclusion I focused on. My topic centers on the experiences of an elementary special education teacher who works with a student with autism. I wanted to explore that inclusion looks like, what inclusion looks like in real classrooms, how teachers adapt instruction, support social development, and collaborate with families and staff to help students succeed. I chose this topic because teachers play such a critical role in shaping inclusive experiences day to day. While laws and policies provide the framework, teachers bring inclusion to life through their actions, strategies, and relationships with students. I wanted to learn directly from someone who is doing this work so I could understand both the challenges and the meaningful successes. The aspect of inclusion I focused on include educational access, collaboration across the student support team, and the social inclusion, especially how students with autism are supported academically and socially within the general education classroom. Altogether, these areas help me develop a clearer picture of what effective and equitable inclusion looks like in practice. For this slide, I'm sharing details about the interview I conducted as part of my applied assignment. Who did I interview? I interviewed an elementary special education teacher who currently works with a student diagnosed with autism. Because she is someone I have a personal connection with, the conversation felt open and authentic. This allowed me to gather meaningful, detailed insights about her daily experiences. Why did I choose her? I chose this interviewee because she works directly in inclusive settings and understands what it takes to support a student with autism in a general education classroom. Her perspective provides practical, real-world examples of collaboration, instructional planning, and problem-solving, things that often go beyond what we read in textbooks or policies. What background knowledge did I bring? Before the interview, I already had foundational knowledge from my coursework and my own teaching experience. I understood that students with autism often need individualized supports, consistent routines, and collaborative planning. but I wanted to deepen this understanding with first-hand stories and examples from someone actively working in the field. Her experience helped me see how these concepts are applied in daily classroom life. For this slide, I'm highlighting 2 course resources that informed my project and helped me better understand inclusion, access, and equity. The first resource, by Pack and Parsons, focuses on equity gaps for students with disabilities. I used this article to understand the larger systemic challenges that students with disabilities face in schools. It helped me connect my interview findings to broader issues of access and fairness, and it reinforced the importance of teacher advocacy and equitable instructional practices. The second resource, by Lawson, Cruz, and Nolman, examines how meaningful interactions help build positive attitudes toward individuals with disabilities. This resource connected closely to my interview because it showed how everyday interactions, such as peer buddy systems, supportive routines, and collaborative activities, can promote empathy and social inclusion for students with autism. It supported my reflection on how inclusion is not just academic but also social and relational. These resources grounded my project in both research and real-world practice, helping me build a fuller understanding of what effective inclusion looks like. Excuse me. For this slide, I'm focusing on 2 outside research sources that supported my applied assignment. The first resource, by Lynch and Irvine, explores best practices for including students with autism in general education classrooms. I used this article because it provided evidence-based strategies that matched many of the methods discussed in my interview, such as visual supports, predictable routines, and collaborative planning. This helped me make stronger connections between real classroom experiences and established research on inclusive education. Excuse me. The second resource, by Lindsay and colleagues, highlights practical teaching strategies used by educators who work with children with autism. I chose this resource because it aligned closely with teachers' experiences, especially regarding communication supports, breaking tasks into manageable steps, and using peer interactions to build social skills. This research validated the approaches described in the interview and gave me a deeper understanding of why these strategies are effective. Together, these 2 resources helped me connect theory, research, and real-life practice, giving me a fuller understanding of how inclusion works and how teachers can successfully support students with evidence. For this slide, I am presenting the 2 main pieces of evidence for my applied assignment. The first piece of evidence is confirmation of my interview with an elementary special education teacher who works with a student diagnosed with autism. The second piece of evidence is the set of interview questions I developed. These questions guided the conversation and helped me explore key areas such as instructional strategies, collaboration with general education teachers, communication with families, and challenges related to inclusion. Excuse me. Together, these 2 pieces of evidence show my presentation for the interview and provide transparency in how I gathered my information. New learning. Sharing my new learning from the interview and how it connects to what we studied in this course. First, in terms of evidence, the interview gave me real-life examples of inclusive practices. Hearing directly from a special education teacher helped me better understand what daily support looks like, such as using visual schedules, predictable routines, multisensory instruction, collaboration with general education teachers, and consistent communication with families. From this evidence, I learned several important things about inclusion. Excuse me. I learned that inclusion requires thoughtful planning and teamwork. It isn't just about placing a student with autism in the general education classroom. It's about creating the environment and support system they need to feel safe, confident, and capable. I also learned that social inclusion is just as important as academic support. Positive peer relationships, even small interactions, can make a big impact on students' confidence and participation. Another key lesson was how teachers must balance structure with flexibility so they can respond to different learning styles and emotional needs. This learning connects strongly to our course materials. It relates to our discussions about equitable access under IDEA, the importance of collaboration, and how cultural perspectives and stereotypes influence disability experiences. It directly ties to the readings on equity gaps and building positive attitudes towards individuals with disabilities. Overall, the interview helped me see how course concepts like advocacy, inclusive practices, and culturally responsive teaching show up in real classroom situations. What I learned about equity from my interview and how it connects to the themes of this course. In terms of evidence, the teacher shared several examples of inequities that students with autism often face, such as communication barriers, social challenges, and needing more processing time. She also explained how limited staffing, heavy workloads, and inconsistent resources can create inequitable learning environments. These real examples help me clearly see how equity issues appear in everyday school settings, not just in policy discussions. From this evidence, I learned that equity is about providing individualized supports to students with autism can access learning in a meaningful and fair way. Equity requires more than simply placing a student in a classroom. It requires schools to provide the tools, accommodations, and trained staff needed to support the students' unique strengths and challenges. I also learned that strong family communication and collaboration are part of equity because students benefit when their cultural backgrounds and home experiences are understood and respected. This connects directly to our course materials. It ties into our discussions on the civil rights, IDEA, ADA, and the importance of equal access to educational opportunities. It also reflects what we learned about systemic inequities that students with disabilities face, and how teachers' preparation, school structures, and community involvement influence equitable outcomes. These themes of fair treatment, reducing stereotypes, and eliminating barriers all show up clearly in this interview and reinforce what we learned throughout this course. Access. In terms of evidence, the teachers shared specific examples of how students with autism access learning, such as visual supports, predictable routines, communication tools, and sensory strategies. He also explains how modified tasks, extra processing time, and consistent structure allow students to participate more fully. At the same time, she described challenges like limited staffing and insufficient planning time, which can directly affect student access. From this evidence, I learned several important things about Access in inclusive settings. I learned that students with autism often rely on structured routines, visual schedules, and multisensory instruction to fully engage with learning. Access isn't automatic. It requires removing barriers, adapting instruction, and meeting students where they are. Excuse me. I also learned that true access involves continuous adjustments based on student needs, rather than expecting the student to adapt to a rigid system. This connects strongly to the course content. It ties into our discussion on accessibility under IDEA and ADA, and it reflects what we learned about breaking down instructional and environmental barriers. It also relates to our readings on individualized supports, universal design for learning, and ensuring meaningful participation for all students. These course ideas came to life through the teachers' real classroom experiences and helped me better understand what accessible education truly requires. Continued inquiry. For my continued inquiry, there are several new questions that I now want to explore. I'm interested in learning more about how schools can strengthen long-term support systems for students with autism, especially as students move from grade to grade. I also want to know how general education teachers can be better supported so that inclusion becomes more effective and sustainable. Another area I'm curious about is how culture influences family engagement and how teachers can create stronger, culturally responsive partnerships with families of students with autism. To learn more about these questions, I plan to explore new research on inclusive school models and universal design for learning. I'd also like to conduct additional interviews with teachers, therapists, and possibly families to gain more perspectives. Observing inclusive classrooms would help me see different strategies in action. And finally, I plan to continue learning through professional development opportunities, webinars, and future coursework. Together, these steps will help me deepen my understanding and continue growing in this area. For my final slide, I have 2 questions for the class, for my peers. My first question is, how can general education teachers and special education teachers collaborate more effectively to support students with autism in inclusive classrooms? I'm curious about what others think collaborations should look like, especially when time, communication, and resources can be limited. My second question is, what strategies have you seen or would you recommend for building stronger family partnerships that support students with disabilities? Family engagement came up a lot in my interview, so I'd love to hear how others approach this or what you have learned from your own experiences. I'm excited to learn from your perspectives. Thank you for listening and for supporting inclusive education.